Good afternoon, everyone. How are you? Hope you can hear me, Julie. Yes?
Yeah, sound great.
Awesome. Nearly 7 years ago, Natalia Martinez walked into our Wave 3 newsroom, joining our team as a reporter and anchor and bringing to our extended family a husband who would be working as a JCPS teacher and coach and one-year-old daughter, Mia. Natalia is from Ocala, Florida, and reported in South Florida, including some horse stories that prepped her for her move to the bluegrass. And she was reporting in Buffalo, New York when she came to us. Like her fellow team members at Wave 3 News, Natalia is very active in the community as a volunteer and helping live out the station vision of building a better community. People who see her reporting on all of our media platforms appreciate her tenacious digging for the untold stories, her source building, and commitment to substantive, impactful news. But to her daughter's friends, she is just that nice mom who enjoys the outdoors. Her daughter's now 8, Mia, and here is Natalia.
Hello, and thank you so much for having me. Nice to meet everyone. And can you guys hear me okay? Yeah, okay, great. Thanks for the intro, and thanks again for having me. It's always nice to be able to show how we put our investigations together, give you a behind the scenes look. Usually my stories and all our stories show up, for 2 minutes on a newscast, but it's good to show, I think, the tons of work that go into putting some of these stories together. And so I know that there was an interest in a couple of things. I've covered extensively LMPD, the department for the past 5 years, and we've exposed a number of stories and a number of problems within the police department that otherwise wouldn't have been exposed, and the public would have no idea. So I do a lot of those kinds of stories. I also do a lot of stories about city government, spending our taxpayer money. And of course, there's always going to be issues that arise. Like, for example, Ferdinand Risco, who was the former director of TARC. It was our station that that broke the story on the number of sexual harassment allegations that he had. And then subsequently, done a number of investigations trying to find out who going to the country. And not only did we expose that there were thousands of dollars that were Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay. All right. I don't know why it just all of a sudden it dropped.
It was telling us you had low bandwidth, so I don't know if you got disconnected or what happened.
Oh no. Okay. Okay. Well, let's hope that that doesn't happen again.
Yeah.
All right. So yeah. So as I was saying, you know, we just recently did another investigation showing the amount of money that was misspent, and also not only that, but we also were able to show that during his trips, this former TARC director wasn't at TARC, and we this was during a time, especially when people with disabilities were being left behind. They were waiting hours for the rides to come pick them up, take them to their doctor's appointment. And it turns out that the director of TARC, there was 1 month where he was in 5 different cities. So we were able to show all that. So that's kind of the stories that I do. I'm going to show you guys this story was from July of 2019. And this was the very first time that we showed what were the effects of all of the things that the LMPD officers had told me throughout the years. Their issues with the administration and the department, their problems with some of the decisions that were being made and how they were being implemented. So much so that then we realized that LMPD was losing their officers at a record rate. So I'm going to kind of lay the ground with this story here that you guys can watch. So I'm gonna go ahead and play it.
For 6 years, Skylar Roddick wore an LMPD badge. He even represented the department in Frankfurt. But this past May, he called it quits. It just doesn't seem to be worth it quickly. Roddick is just one of 119 LMPD officers who've left the department in the past year. That's nearly 10% of the entire force. It's a growing trend here since 2015. At the end of the day, the citizens of the community are going to suffer. Roddick's reasons for leaving: low morale within LMPD and feeling like his character could be attacked for simply doing his job without anyone having his back. Yeah, the same thing on LMPD is not the anything. Don't do anything, never get in trouble. More than half of those who left since July quit. The rest retired. But we discovered many are taking their years of experience.
How y'all doing today?
Somewhere else.
You like Snickers?
Officer Eric Kemper is now with the newly established Middletown Police. He's one of 6 former LMPD officers working here, including Chief Rob Herman.
All of officers have their start and all their training and experience in Old Metro Police.
Chief Herman says it's a hiring frenzy that's benefiting the people of Middletown, adding up to more than 120 years of experience.
At least.
He's gotten applications from high-ranking officers and detectives wanting to lead the biggest police department in the state.
It's a little bit sad. It's like going back to your old high school. It's not the award-winning school that it was before.
The chief says community policing in Middletown offers less stress
You can watch your speed.
and more pay,
That's correct.
starting at $52,000 compared to $39,185 at LMPD. Other local departments like Shepherdsville have raised their pay and spruced up their benefits package too, with affordable health care.
We want it. Because we police officers. That's what most of these officers want to do.
Chief Rick McCubbin has hired 5 former LMP officers so far and told us that for 8 spots, he's received about 50 applications, most of all of which are from LMP.
Sting isn't the word about nauseating.
Chief McCubbin is a former Louisville officer himself.
I would never thought I'd live to see the day that the Louisville Police Department would become a stepping stone department instead of a destination department.
It's a challenge we don't have all the answers to. LMPD spokesperson Jessie Halliday told us the large numbers of people leaving is in part because of concerns over recent pension changes. She also says times have changed.
There's a shift in how people think about careers. We don't necessarily have 20-year careers anymore.
But some of the
Natalia, are you still there? Can you hear us?
In terms of, you know, people leaving companies that they may work for.
Can you unmute to Ken, please, Alyssa?
He's unmuted.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's a great idea. Delene just said, Ken, that we could share a link after this to the video so everyone can review what she was trying to show us. I think with the weather and the bandwidth, it's not working as well as we'd like, and especially with the video, even the audio is kind of low. So that's a great idea, Delene. We will get with her and do that.
Yeah, okay. Well, I'll put the links up, and here, my guy is going to plug in the actual Ethernet so that it doesn't drop out again.
Okay.
So yeah, I'll provide the links. And then we've done a number of stories about the police department. A lot of the investigations, let me share this screen here. 1 second. Okay, I think we're good.
Let's see.
Okay, 1 second.
Here we go.
Okay, do I need to click on it?
No. Yes.
Okay.
You're good.
Okay, so now that shouldn't happen again because we are hardwired. So yeah, so that story that I was showing you, that video, was the first time that we learned that officers were leaving the department and going elsewhere. And that then has precipitated over the last year. That story was in July of 2019. We are now, 1 year later, the department has lost more than 15% of its officers. And during this time of civil unrest and COVID and all of the issues going on with our city right now, we've lost even more officers. So we've lost not only a number of officers, but we've also lost 20% of the command staff. So these are the experienced officers that have years on the department and are the majors, the ones who watch over their divisions. We've lost 20% of them. So we're experiencing a brain drain within the police department. And then of course there's, I'm going to show you this picture here so that you see, okay, can you guys see that? That is a picture of one of my file cabinets, and that entire drawer is filled with investigations into members of law enforcement. That's one of several cabinets. We've held a lot of people accountable. That is one of the things that we really try to do. Let me show. Can you guys see this picture of Todd Shaw? This was one of our investigations. This story here ended with him being fired, but this was a police officer that used to work at Louisville Metro, and you could see the title there of the story. We had to go to court, actually, to get the records where it showed that this police officer was making extremely racist comments on Facebook, and it was a private conversation. So we exposed that story. We also exposed this guy named Pablo Cano, who was convicted of sexual assault charges and also child pornography charges. But sometimes, these stories take a lot of work, a lot of open records requests, which are my favorite thing in the world. Without our open records laws and without those open records requests, there would be a lot of information that we just would not be privy to. And it's not only, negative, it's not only, we've had to fight not only for records about officers who get in trouble, but also we've had to file open records requests and fight to get video, not only video, but also facts about, let's see here, let me show you this story. Things when officers do something right, or if they're being accused of something that doesn't turn out to be true. This story here was of a controversial traffic stop, and the cell phone video that was provided by the public appeared to show the officers taking somebody down, there were criticisms of police brutality. But what we ended up finding out after 1 year of constant open records requests, we found that the body cam video actually showed that the suspect had rammed the police officers first. He was standing next to his car, and then he runs over towards the police officer and then knocks him to the ground. That had never come out before, and had it not been for us pushing to get these records, that police officer would probably have continued to get death threats. So it's not just problem officers that sometimes we have to, work to expose. It's also officers that sometimes, they're just doing, doing everything right. So those are a couple of the LMPD stories that we've done. And then we also have done a lot of work on the Breonna Taylor case. And as members of the media, when the story when we first learned of the shooting, there were very little facts that we knew. We just knew that it was an officer-involved shooting. There wasn't any body camera video of the actual incident. So it was a couple of months after where we started hearing from Breonna Taylor's family, and we started hearing from her attorney, Ben Crump, who's this nationally recognized attorney who's dealt with a lot of officer-involved stories and cases across the country, like Ferguson. That was another one of his cases. So we started hearing from him and his narrative, and so then we started trying to find out whether some of the things that he was saying were true and what the facts of the case were, trying to find out why officers were there. In the beginning, the family and Ben Crump had said that police had the wrong address, and that they did not have a warrant for Breonna Taylor. So I started, making phone calls, checking with my sources, trying to find out what facts were out there and available to us then. And so what I was able to find was the actual police warrant that existed, not only the warrant, but the affidavit as well. And we were the ones who broke that story. And we showed on TV the actual warrant that we did find with Miss Taylor's address on it. Not only did it show her address, but this is the first time that we learned that she had been a suspect in the warrant and in this drug case centered around her ex-boyfriend. So the attorney that represents Miss Taylor at the time didn't even have the warrants. And so the way that we approached it, and the reason why we were able to find that, was because one of the main things that, one of the most beneficial things is knowing where to look and knowing how things work. So I do have a lot of sources within the police department, but the most beneficial thing that they provide to me aren't the random tips, which I'm always thankful for, that we're able to break, sporadically. But the main things that I find are so important are their explanation of how things work. So who writes a warrant? Then what happens? Then does it go to a judge? And where does it get filed? Who then has possession of that warrant? Those kinds of things, so that I know where to look. And that is what happened with the Taylor warrant. And it kind of shifted a lot of the narrative that was incorrect at the time, saying that police were at the wrong address, and that and that Ms. Taylor had nothing to do with the investigation. So those two things ended up not being true, and we showed that through the course of a warrant. And it was kind of tricky to find, I will say, but then again, I had to know where to look, and with the help of the clerk's office, we were able to narrow down and break that story. Then we get to I'm going to play this story for you. That was also, now by the way, all these stories that I'm talking about are exclusive. So these are stories that I've broken. They didn't come from anywhere else, just our
This is a
work.
picture from the inside of one of the bedrooms in Breonna Taylor's home. The curtains are closed. You can see the holes made by bullets. Here's another picture. The blinds also closed. Another picture from the outside shows this bullet hole. The back patio glass door also shot out. Reliable sources told me that one of the officers, Brent Hinkison, had shot multiple rounds into the apartment blindly from the outside, corroborating this particular claim from Taylor's attorneys. LMPD did confirm 3 officers fired their weapons that night: John Mattingly, who returned fire after being shot in the leg, and Miles Cosgrove, who also returned fire from the inside, leaving Hinkison. To be clear, those same sources do not believe Taylor was struck by any of the bullets fired from Hinkison from the outside in. The danger was not only for Taylor or for the man who did shoot an officer, but for the other officers inside of the apartment as well. Attorney Sam Aguiar said Breonna's sister's room was littered with bullets, and she was lucky not to have been home at the time.
By the grace of God, he was out of town.
So that story there was the very first time, let's see here. It was the very first time that we had, that we learned that shots had been fired from the outside of Miss Taylor's apartment in. Not only that, but that they'd been shot through closed blinds. And we had the actual pictures that were exclusive just to me and on Wave, where we showed the blinds actually being closed. And the reason why I was able to put that story together was because of my sources that were there that night, the night of the warrant and the night that Ms. Taylor was shot and killed. So since then, I knew that shots had been fired from the outside, but I couldn't report it until I could prove it. So once we obtained those pictures that showed that, the story then came together. And of course, now we know, Officer Brett Hankison was fired from the police department because of what they considered recklessness. And even in the termination letter for Mr. Hankison, they laid the groundwork there, and we saw a term, wanton endangerment, which is what, attorneys say may end up being the charge for Mr. Hankison there. So, that was another story that we broke in the Breonna Taylor case that changed, it did have an impact in how people learned about the case with those facts about Mr. Officer Hankison shooting from the outside in. Since then, of course, there's been a lot of work to be done. I have my, if you could see my cabinets above my desk, I have these huge binders that, let's see, I can show you this one. This is what my investigation folders typically look like. This is the one on the Elliott Avenue project, which is where Breonna Taylor's ex-boyfriend lived. And there's a lot of questions about what this project was and why. There's accusations that the city, that, you know, this project was the reason why Breonna's ex-boyfriend was targeted by police in the first place. So this is what one of my typical investigative files looks like. It's very organized because obviously there's so much information that comes in that we quickly have to find and put together. So since then, obviously there's been a lot of civil unrest, and there's a lot of work that I'm doing right now to find out what happened during the rioting and the looting. So very separate than the actual protesting that was being done by people who are searching for change, accountability, and, you know, racial equity and justice, particularly with police departments. So, you know, very separate. So we have that group of people that that are protesting, and then we had the group of people who weren't protesting, they were rioting, and they were looting, and they were destroying businesses and stealing from them, breaking into ATMs and just walking away with the buckets of cash. And we were watching so much of this from live feeds, from our own crews that were out in the middle of this when all the rioting really, some of the worst nights of the rioting. And so then I started to try to find out who was making the decisions for the police department. And what I learned was during the first 2 nights of heavy rioting, officers were texting me and messaging me real time, telling me, you know, we're sitting here watching these businesses be destroyed, and we are being told to stand down. This has now become, you know, an issue that I am currently still working on, because there's a lot of businesses that felt that they weren't protected when, you know, their windows were being bashed in, and their businesses were being destroyed. So we have done, you know, some stories about whether these stand down orders came down at the hands of who made that decision. And so we are still trying to prove some of that. That's, you know, some of the stuff that we've been working on, or I've been working on, involving the rioting and the looting. Of course, you know, some of that also encompasses who were making the calls the night of the David McAtee shooting. Mr. McAtee was the restaurant owner that operated right across the street from Dino's Food Mart, which has had a number of shootings, 2 murders in the last 2 years, more than 1,000 runs from law enforcement in the last 2 years. And then one of the nights of the rioting, the National Guard was called to disperse a crowd at Dino's. And then that led to a shootout with Mr. McAtee, who was a very popular, beloved figure in the West End, even by police officers who used to go eat at his barbecue place all the time. And there was a shootout, and it ended with Mr. McAtee losing his life. So we wanted to know who made those calls, who called in the National Guard, and why, who was in command, because we had not seen the chief of police that night on TV. We only saw a spokesperson for the police department, which, by the way, is not law enforcement. So I wanted to know who was in charge, who was making the calls, who called in the National Guard, why, how were officers being told to respond to these situations of looting and rioting, just so that we know what actually was going on within the police department and who was responsible. It's been rather challenging because and so you could see how we're working to put this stuff together. We submitted a number of open records requests, and I told officers, if you get stand down orders, I need to prove it. So tell me, what time did you get those orders and what transmission call, so that we can hear it for ourselves and we can play it on TV. They did so, and they gave me specific times. The challenge that I have now is that the police department has denied those open records requests, claiming that it's part of an open investigation. Certainly 7-8 hours worth of transmission calls are not all going to pertain to an open investigation. So a blanket denial to me was inappropriate for what we were asking for. And so I'm currently trying to fight that decision so that we can obtain those records and we can hear exactly what officers were being told to do. So that's some of the stuff that I am trying to work on. And then there are, let's see, let me pull the, here, can you guys see this picture? Maybe not. Can you guys see this picture? Let's see. Well, I'm trying to find, okay. Well, I was going to show you a picture. I don't think it's coming up here. But it is, so officers were so frustrated with the orders to stand down that during roll call, there were about 200 officers that ended up walking out on Louisville Mayor Greg Fisher. And we had video. We broke the story, and we also showed the actual video at 6 o'clock. And at the same time, at 6 o'clock, Mayor Fisher was on another TV station doing a live interview when they asked him, had officers walked out on him, and he denied it. He said there were a couple of boos, but nobody walked out. Well, at the same time, on Wave, we were playing video of hundreds of officers walking out and him talking to an officer as the officer is explaining why officers were walking out. So, we not only did we break the story, but we had video showing actually what was going on and what was happening. And I think all of those things are very important because nothing ever happens in a vacuum. And there are many different pieces that come together and contribute to, contribute to what we're experiencing right now in the city. So if the police department had such a big disgruntlement with the mayor, I thought it was very important to show. And so currently we are working on to gather more information on not just on the Taylor case to find out more about what happened that night and what led to the investigation, but also the city's role in that Elliott Avenue project. So Taylor's ex-boyfriend was living on Elliott Avenue. It's a small area in the West End, and where this group of officers began, investigating Glover, that's his name, under the suspicion of drug trafficking. It was that investigation that then led the officers to Miss Taylor's apartment the night of the shooting. But what we want to find out now is why officers were tasked to investigate Glover, because I found out that there was this Elliott Avenue project from 2019 that had already been in the works. And I also found proof that the city, the Office of Community Development, had been in talks with police about particularly the Elliott Avenue project. So there definitely was a relationship there, which the city had tried to distance itself. So right now I'm in the midst of all these open records requests and trying to find out exactly what happened and why. And it is a slow process. Usually our reporters, we come in every day, we pitch our stories, and we deliver a story that day. I am in a unique position, thank you, Ken, because I can spend the time that it requires to put these stories together, to investigate them, to obtain the records, to talk to the people involved, and to finally put a story together. Usually, depending on the investigations, some of them I can turn around rather quickly if I get a certain record back or a certain piece of documentation. Some of my investigations have taken months and months and months. The interrupters program with the city, that investigation lasted, goodness, more than a year. So some of the things that I work on are really, it's like you get little pieces of puzzles and then you start, putting them together. And so that's kind of what, I just wanted to show you guys how much, how we put these stories together and how we find what, what's really going on. I think there's, let's see, what do you know about the Elliott Avenue project and what was the motivation from it? Oh, I'm sorry. There's a lot of comments here that I guess I ignored.
Okay, I'll pick out a couple just to ask you.
Oh, okay.
You won't have to read them all, so because some of it had to do with the audio and so forth. So
okay.
Go ahead with what you started with.
Okay, so would you like me to go ahead and start answering questions?
Yeah, I think you have it perfect. What do you know about the Elliott Avenue project and what was the motivation for it to be initiated? And that's from Tom Crimmins. Okay,
so Tom, so what we know about the Elliott Avenue project is that it was in the works since November, at least November of 2019. We know a few set of facts. One, that the city owns 60% of the properties on Elliott Avenue. We know that the city was in talks with LMPD about Elliott Avenue and clearing out, crime on that block. And we do know, now this I haven't reported yet, we do know that the city even had a meeting 2 weeks before the execution of the warrant with members of community development, the mayor, LMPD command staff, and even members of their place-based investigative team. That unit was the unit that was investigating Breonna Taylor's ex-boyfriend. That is the unit that then executed the warrants. That is the unit that is at the center of the shooting. So we know that the city was in talks with police. Now, particularly about Elliott Avenue. Now, some people have taken that to say that it was a gentrification project that led to Taylor's death, or that was, the root cause of Taylor's death. I don't know whether it was going to be a gentrification project. I think a lot of the other media outlets started reporting it as such. We just know that it was a project, that it was in its infancy. But we do know now, and we had the proof that the police department was actually working with codes and regs, community development, to try to, clear crime from the area.
I had a couple of questions that kind of tie together. This one is from Mac McClure. How many of the officers that have left were the result of fears regarding the state pension fund? There's lots going on in that. If you're in state government, you're familiar with that, or leaving to go elsewhere because of better salaries and benefits, especially health care. And then another question that kind of ties to it. We've lost close to 20%, I think is what you've said. How does that compare to other large cities?
other large cities have not lost the amount of officers exponentially. Now, there is a problem with recruiting officers nationally. That is true. But there's a lot of, so to answer the first couple of questions, the pension did play a role in why some officers decided to leave. However, a lot of the officers that left because of that reason, they then, decided to work elsewhere. There were the number of police officers that actually just quit the department was different than the number of officers that decided to retire because of the pension. So, and anecdotally, that's not what we were hearing. The officers, this came at a time where morale was at an all-time low. There were 2 separate votes of no confidence against Chief Conrad. And so, yeah, the pension had something to do with it, but I don't believe that it was the root cause. And that is evidenced by the continuous loss of officers. That story was a year ago. Since then, that number of the percentage of officers that have left has doubled. So, it really wasn't the pension that was the leading cause, I believe, based on, my conversations with officers and really what the numbers showed.
Thank you for that. This is from Cynthia Miles Brown. She would like to know, how often do people come to you to find something out versus you all doing your in-house and identifying topics that as an organization it is identified that need researched?
Yeah, I think it's kind of a combination of both. I do get a lot of, I'm very fortunate, knock on wood, that I get a lot of tips to look into things, particularly because of the kind of crime and punishment and city government things that I cover. I'm very fortunate that people come to me and say, hey, have you heard about this? Do you know if this is true? When I was showing you the number of investigations that we've done on police officers, I can tell you that the way that I found those cases involving, these few bad apples was because other officers would come and tell me, like, hey, you need to look into the messages from Todd Shaw because I heard that they were racist. Take a look at that, see what you find. That was one. Pablo Cano was the officer who's now convicted of child porn and sexual assault charges. He was another one. Officers came to me and said, hey, you need to look into this guy because he's bad news. Lo and behold, this investigation then just opens up a can of worms. Same thing with Hankison. Brett Hankison's the officer that fired from the outside in. It's been a number of officers that have told me, look here, he worked there, he did this, he was accused of that, he used to work here. For me, I'm very fortunate that people come to me and tell me, just help shine a light, just ask the question where I need to look, and then I take it from there.
Well, I can say this, that's because you're trusted, and that's
thank you.
Journalist, that's the highest calling right there. So from Larry Sloan, he would like to know, he says, thanks for telling us about your work today. I was already a fan, but even more so now. Good journalists are a key part of our democracy, and we just shared a little bit about the good work that you do, keeping the trust from your sources. That's very important. Steve Carrick has a great question. He says, ever consider any undercover good news stories where perhaps someone is doing great things, work in the community, but wants to fly under the radar?
Yeah, I love a good story. But to be honest, my sister always jokes with me, and she's like, Natalia, you're always full of bad news. And so, good stories are fantastic, and it does warm your heart when you're able to tell them. But honestly, my bag is full with things that need to be exposed in order to create, substantive change for, Metro Council members to be aware of and then discuss and question. and for the public to be aware of. So I love a good story. I honestly don't get, too much time to do them because I'm so focused on, on these investigations. Now, if I do get a good story, I always, if I'm not going to be able to get to it, which I probably won't, I pass it along to our other reporters who are able to do those kinds of stories.
Okay, so this one's from Rick King, and you don't have to answer this if you don't feel like it's the right thing for you to do, but based upon your investigations, do you think the officers will be charged by the AG officer, Daniel Cameron? And then furthermore, I'd like to know, what are we doing to prepare for when that announcement does come out? I imagine that you all are ready to go, just waiting for the day. So I'd like to hear more about that.
Yeah, so from everything that I have gathered, speaking with people that are directly involved in the investigation, speaking with the attorneys representing Breonna Taylor, I talk to Sam Aguiar almost every day, if not every other day, about where they're at and things that they're putting together. Based on all of those conversations, my expectation is that Hankerson may be charged with wanton endangerment, and I think that the police department has kind of laid the groundwork by, putting that term on his termination letter, for example. But I do not believe that the two other officers are going to be charged with murder. I don't know if there's any other subsequent charges that may arise, be it the way that they wrote the warrant, if there's any, other possible crimes there. I know one of the other officers is being investigated for perjury because of how he wrote a line on the warrant. So there may be something along those lines. But based on the conversations with attorneys, with legal experts, with Taylor's own attorneys, and with the officers that are involved investigating this, I don't believe that those other two officers are going to be charged with murder.
Okay, well, real good. And thank you so much for your hard work. And, you're very dedicated, just showing us the binders. I think it looks so easy. You get up and give a quick report, but the volumes of hours and the dedication that goes in to get that nugget of truth, it's commendable. So thank you so much for your good work and for
Thank
ways
you.
you will serve the community, Ken.
Thank you. It's fun. Like, for example, I'll give you guys just a little sneak peek into what I'm working on. Now, I don't know if this is going to be a story, and at some point, honestly, I hope it doesn't, because, we saw Mr. John Grandmaster Johnson. He was the head of the militia here in Louisville. That just came this past weekend, 200 people armed with rifles. And this individual had also made threats that he was going to burn the city down if these officers aren't charged within his 4-month deadline. Well, when I started looking into who this guy is, I found that there really wasn't anything done on him. There was no other stories about who he is, his background, and so what I spent the last 2 days working on was finding out whether this guy is even legally able to have a gun. And there is, just show you here, I have reason to believe that he may not be because he had arrest records from other states that were gun related, like here's some of his arrest record. And they were gun related. Not only were they gun related, but once I looked up the statute, it showed that he was found to have, to not mentally be stable in order to possess a firearm. And that was in the state of Maryland. So just a little sneak peek into what I'm working on next. And, was kind of fun the last 2 days calling every police department and sheriff's office and jail in Maryland and North Carolina, trying to put all of this together. So stay tuned.
Oh, wow. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Well, thank you again for an excellent program. And Ken, thank you so much for all you all do for the community. So just a couple reminders, if you all could make sure your information is up to date. We keep sharing about this, the member directory. We want to get that out, and we want to make sure that your contact information is current. If you're finding that most people need to reach you by a cell phone, if you could please include that in your record, I think that would be helpful for everyone, since so many of us are not necessarily working out of our offices. So please add that to your information. And there are additional business synergy events that's scheduled, as we mentioned earlier. You can go to the Sparks newsletter. There's links that go directly to that where you can register, or just let Alyssa know, or Mike. We'd love to have you. So with that, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.